The Revopoint Pop is a budget-friendly handheld 3D scanner. It's about $500 or $600 depending on where you pick it up. I got mine on Amazon for about $620. It was the scanner kit that includes the turntable and the hand grip and all the little accessories and stuff. I would say it's fair to call this a beginner scanner because the price is way on the low end and the accuracy and resolution aren't really well suited to things like aerospace engineering, rapid prototyping, manufacturing, stuff like that. I would say it's better suited to somebody like me, a hobbyist or somebody very new to this, who maybe just intends to do something cool with it, maybe play with it a little bit, and then decide if they really want to spend a lot of money on something much higher resolution. But the results are pretty legit. I mean, it works absolutely fine for my purposes, mostly just like 3D printing. Setup is actually pretty easy. It just comes with a little thumb drive, you slip that in your computer, it has software. Don't install that! Instead, head to their website and install the latest version straight off the site. If you install it off the thumb drive, you're just gonna have to wait for the program to update itself off of their website anyway, so you can just save yourself the step. Anyway, after the program is installed, launch it, then plug in your 3D scanner. That's it. Oh, warning, sometimes the program just like loses track of the scanner. Just unplug it and plug it back in. If that doesn't work, unplug it, close the program, open the program, plug it back in. I've never had that not work. It's just not a perfect program. It generally works fine, but like just sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time when I run into an issue, it's because I'm in the middle of doing something and then I decide to not do that anymore. So I cancel it, or I toss out what I already had, or I go back a few times, or I start a new project. And it just can't keep up with me doing that. So it's not a giant issue. It's a little bit annoying, but I've never had it lose connection in the middle of a huge scan or something. It's never ruined something I was working on. But number one tip, maybe the only tip for using this thing at all, practice with it. You are not gonna buy this thing, get it in the mail, and just go out somewhere and start scanning stuff and nailing it perfectly. It's just not gonna happen, man. You have to practice. There's a setting that determines the exposure of the texture if you're doing a scan with a texture. There's also an auto setting for that same thing, but that also affects the white balance, so you gotta figure out how that works. There's no manual white balance control, at least not that I could find. It's a little weird. There also appear to be two controls that affect the sensitivity of how the scanner actually sees an object. It's an infrared scanner. It uses infrared light, so it shoots out light from the front of it, and then the IR cameras see that light in 3D and build the model based on that. The two settings that affect that though, one seems to be like a step-up setting. It's a drop-down menu, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it seems to detect like the range of how much IR light you want to see. And then the other setting is like a little sliding bar. It's kind of like a fine tune, but it almost like, it affects like the cutoff. Like it's not quite exactly what I just said, but you'll see what I mean. It might be a little bit more fair to say the drop-down menu affects the exposure level and what range you can see light in, and the other slider sort of affects how much it records versus how much it eliminates. It's almost like contrast. I don't know. Really hard to describe. It's not intuitive to tell you about, but literally if you just tweak it for like 5 or 6 minutes, you'll see what I mean. But to make things just a little bit easier, Revopoint has pre-installed a bunch of little presets that you can use to get started with. Like if you pick the setting that's used for scanning darker materials, it just tweaks all the settings to be super duper sensitive so that it can see a darker material, because that's what you need. There's also settings for like scanning with markers, scanning faces, scanning entire bodies, and so on. After 1 or 2 reasonable test runs, you should pretty much get it. There are limits though. Most handheld 3D scanners have limits. They almost all struggle to see certain materials. I mean, like anything that's wet, glass, metal, or really anything reflective. There's a lot of tips for working around limitations like that though. Like for example, one really popular tip is anything that's transparent or too reflective, just spray it down with a bunch of hairspray and then it makes like a kind of texture on the surface and you can scan it. And then you can also just wipe it off because hairspray is water soluble. I've never done that. I haven't scanned anything that's metal yet, but apparently that's a thing that works and everybody everywhere does it. By the way, if you happen to have a lot of insight about stuff like that, please let me know. I'm getting really into this lately. For my purposes though, the pop scanner works exactly fine. Like as you can see, what is that? Well, the mesh is pretty good. It's a little bumpy, but like a really quick touch up in Blender with the smoothing brush completely cleans it up. It's 100% workable. That is my face, kind of. It's missing the beard, but I didn't want to, I had trouble with the beard. I just didn't do that yet. I'll do a new one with the beard eventually. It really struggled with my hair and my beard because I have very fine, very dark hair and it's extremely curly and it just, the light penetrates and doesn't reflect back correctly, so the scanner can't really see it very well. Out of curiosity, I just wanted to see how it would work on somebody else's face. So I invited my buddy Tegan over and I forced him to let me scan his face. It didn't work better on his beard at all. But I painted his beard white and then it worked. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it's definitely enough to get a decent scan. Like, that'll fix up really nice. You can also apparently just pause it mid-scan and adjust your material settings to see hair better, and then continue the scan and it'll make the model just fine, but I really wanted to paint my friend's beard white. Anyway, after the mesh is calculated, if you scanned it in color mode, it also takes a series of pictures of the subject while you're scanning, and then it stitches all of those together into a texture. It does that automatically. And it works, I mean, like, it really does work fine when you're working on something that you can't tell doesn't look exactly the way that it's supposed to. But for my poor ugly mug, like, it really took me down a notch. I mean, oh. Wow. I don't bring that up to highlight something that I look at and I see as a problem. I bring that up to highlight that you need to be careful while you're scanning. You have to be mindful of the way that the scanner is working in order to get a good result from it. In my case, I wasn't lit properly and it was my first scan. It was my very first scan was my face. I also went over my face just over and over again, like 6 or 7 times, and you're not supposed to do that. It messes up the geometry because it keeps taking data points with teeny tiny itty bitty slight variations of movement, and it tries to reconcile them all, which is why it looked so bumpy. It shouldn't have looked that bumpy. That was my fault. The recommendation is that you scan areas once and overlap as little as possible. In the case of scanning facial features specifically, it can make your face a little blurry or PlayStation 1-y. It doesn't matter though, because the purpose of me scanning my face wasn't to make a photoreal replica digitally. The point of me scanning my face was so I could print it. So it's funny, I've actually been leaving these at my friends' houses. I got a pack of like little sticky squares that you can put on the back, and then I've just been like putting it on their fridges and toilets and things like that and just leaving them. It's legitimately worth it to have a 3D scanner and a 3D printer just to do that. And I'll tell you what, Brandon, I'll stop when you find them all. Bottom line, it is a more than decent scanner, especially at the price point. In fact, at that price point, the $500, $600 range, I didn't expect to find a 3D scanner at all. That blew me away. It's definitely one of the cheapest possible options besides like photogrammetry with your cell phone. And for the record, this is way more accurate than photogrammetry with your cell phone. But in total fairness, I will say cell phone photogrammetry is probably also a decent beginner option because it won't cost you anything extra and it's easier and faster for most people to understand. It's just not nearly as actually accurate as a real 3D scanner. I am actually working on a set of full body scans of people right now, which it turns out is really, really difficult, especially with everything going on. So, if anybody has any tips about how to make that faster or easier, please let me know. I am all ears for that. Also, once they're ready, I'll put a link down in the description of this video, and then you can check out the 3D models and how they turned out. Just so you know though, that is not going to happen anytime soon. It's a lot. It's a lot to do. Anyway, bye.